and welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster recovery, business continuity, COVID, resilience, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare, respond, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can reach me through LinkedIn. I'm the only person there. There should be a link in the video description down below. So feel free, just reach out and we'll see about getting you on the show or finding someone to come on the show or talk about what topic you'd like to see us talk about. Today is an interesting day. It's going to be the first time, it's not the first time my guest and I have spoken. You probably recognize him, James Green, off to the side. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for having me back.
And what we're going to try and do is just have more of a casual chat once a month, some relevant topics that are happening in the news or points of view, maybe disagree with somebody else's podcast. You never know, whatever comes to mind, whatever's bothering us. So we'll try to do this monthly. And so James, today is our first show, even though it's not our first show, but it is our first ongoing in a series. And we do have a couple of points to get to, but how are you doing in the meantime?
I'm doing good. Thank you, Alex. I'm really excited about us having these kind of like topical talks, what's happening right now, today, yesterday, this morning. So really excited. Hope your audience is as pumped about this as I am.
So. Well, they will be. I know. I always get excited about talking with you and excuse me. And I talk about with Regina Phelps every month, and we talk about vaccines and from her perspective and different things that are out there. Mm-hmm. So it'll be great to talk to you about some other aspects that are in the news and other situations. So I'm looking forward to this. Let's jump into some of I know we've got a couple of things to chat on, but the first thing I want to talk about is you got your first needle for COVID, your first vaccine.
Yes, I have my vaccine card here. My PII is facing away from the camera. As all good security professionals. I didn't take a selfie with this, so I don't know if it technically counts, but I did get my first shot on Friday, and it got me to thinking, and I wanted to share with you, looking at distribution of the vaccine. First question, it's really fascinating to me how this is working or not working in different countries. Mm-hmm. Right. I would say over the last 12 months, the United States was probably not at the cutting edge of risk mitigation, of pandemic response. We were probably in the bottom, 2%, 5% of the world in terms of response. But now here the US is out of nowhere, the dark horse in terms of distribution. And I think it's really fascinating that the country that kind of led the league, if we're looking at a sports analogy, in bottom of the barrel, is now I think 35% vaccinated. President Biden said all Americans over 18 will be eligible to get the vaccine by April 19th.
Yeah,
it's just amazing. Amazing turnaround for a vaccine that was announced 5 months ago. And so it got me thinking, what has happened in the rest of the world, right?
I can tell you what's happening here.
Let's start with Canada. Let's talk about...
It might be easier to say what's not happening here. I did some follow-up today looking into a few things because I knew we'd be talking about it. And you mentioned last year, so the previous American administration had an impact on us.
Yes.
Because we were always getting hit with tariffs and different bans on, timber, aluminum, and a bunch of other things. So we turned to the European Union for our doses because we thought if we get it from the US, the administration is going to stop it and we're going to be left empty-handed.
Yes.
Well, now Europe has had its own problems So it's delayed our delivery over here. So when we're supposed to get, I'll just throw out a number because I've seen smaller numbers, but 50,000 doses, let's say one week. If we get anything, it's half that. And if we get anything at all, it's a week late anyway, at least. So we've been having challenges trying to get the vaccine out there because of that, because all our eggs, so to speak, were put in the European basket. We're now obviously reaching out and having discussions with the US because you guys are being so much more successful now. So we can reach out for assistance. We can turn to the US now, which we couldn't do before. So that's having the big challenge now. They are opening up vaccines to people 55 and older. My best friend now is able to schedule an appointment. My mother is now able to schedule an appointment. Well, actually, she's getting hers next week, and her follow-up is already scheduled as well. So I'm hoping now that over the next 2 weeks or so, we're going to see a bigger uptick in getting the vaccine out there because it hasn't been that successful. And we are actually seeing a big uptick in the variant impact.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard on Friday of all days, Good Friday, the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, announced that schools in specific areas would be closed, businesses would be closed, we'd be going into another kind of 4-week lockdown. You know, they didn't want people to travel, which was a ridiculous timing. Friday of a long weekend, nobody's working, people are already traveling. You know,
Exactly.
and saying, "Oh, don't do it." Well, it's too late. You know, it's too late. And now the schools in my area, and I'm an hour and a bit west of Toronto, but in this county, as of tomorrow, schools are closed because they're seeing a big uptick in younger cases. And I don't mean young as in 40-year-olds. I mean young as in, you know, teenagers and 20-year-olds are getting it now. So look at the Vancouver Canucks.
Exactly. Yeah, I find the whole vaccine distribution really fascinating from a cultural standpoint and a risk management standpoint, right? The first thing that was very surprising to me, where I'm based in the state of Florida in the US, early on, vaccine distribution was terrible because no one had thought about what's the best way to distribute a vaccine. So we've all been dealing with this pandemic for over a year, and no one thought about, okay, well, eventually, you know, in your classical business continuity sense, we're going to have to recover. We're going to have to restore. How are we going to do that? And basically, everyone just didn't think about that until it was already in their hands. You had a very slow start in the US. And then again in the US, very surprising that the Southeast United States, what was probably the most conservative in opinion about social distancing and masking, tended to be the most aggressive in distribution, which is really not what you would expect looking at, you know, the US politically as a whole. Certainly in Canada, yeah, by just, you know, saying, well, the EU is the best route to go. And then, you know, you've had some massive political missteps in the EU. Looking at France, you know, some very high level politicians indicating that vaccines may or may not be safe. France traditionally has the lowest vaccination rates, I believe, in Europe in general, right? And now you have France, the lowest COVID vaccination rate in the EU, going back into, like Ontario, a third lockdown, schools closed for a month. They elected to leave everything open during the winter, which is typically a high flu and cold transmission season anyways. And now they're rolling into spring with no vaccine abundance of supplies, low distribution rates, terrible vaccination rates. It's really been interesting to watch the different parts of the world manage this completely differently. And I think maybe disheartening that people didn't come together across borders, that every country was just like, okay, figure this out for yourself. right in the beginning in terms of travel, social distancing, mask protocols, and now with development and distribution of a vaccine. Like I said, it's beyond bizarre for me to live in a country that was the most reckless the last 12 months, frankly, that I have this and you don't. So very, very strange. And I wonder how risk managers who work cross country, right? You work for a multinational. How are you managing this right now where every jurisdiction is completely different? The scale up is different. You even have now, again, since I've been touting my beloved state of Florida on Friday, just like you, Good Friday, our governor wrote an executive order making it illegal for private companies. So my employer cannot legally ask me for this. So an employer can't even ask if you're vaccinated, but the US federal law says employers get credit for giving employees time off if they get vaccinated. So you already have, again, this very bizarre political struggle where the federal law and the state law contradict each other. We're seeing companies caught in the middle of that. So you want to claim those federal tax credits, but now you can't ask your employees. It's just this whole issue has been confounding for a year. And I just sit wondering, like, how did we, I really feel like collectively, globally, we dropped the ball, and how are we not helping each other? Or like you said, I saw now, Canada is going to India for shipments because the EU shipments are tardy or slow, or like you said, delayed. I wonder, from a military resilience standpoint, Canada not having the manufacturing capability to make this vaccine.
That's going to change. They passed something just, I think, not even a week ago, that they are going to be building a big facility. I can't remember where. I want to say someplace in Quebec, the province of Quebec, but they want to build a big manufacturing facility that does focus on these kind of things. So we manufacture our own flu shots, the annual flu shot, the whatever COVID comes out, or a combination of those, and some of the other, medicines that are out there. And so that in case something does happen again down the road, obviously, we're talking a couple of years down the road, because the ground hasn't even been broken yet. So, but if it does happen, we will have our own facility to focus on first, get that up and running, focus that, and then look elsewhere, rather than look elsewhere right off the bat.
Yeah, and who would have thought that we would be discussing medicine in the lens of national security? Because to your point earlier, with a different administration, certainly the United States would not have even considered exporting or allowing anything to leave the border, maybe even stockpiling or hoarding things we don't need. And it's, and here we're just talking about first world countries. We haven't even discussed yet third world countries that maybe don't have the financial resources, the logistics to be able to distribute. And I wonder, is that going to be maybe the third phase of COVID, where the first phase was, what are we doing? And the second phase is we have a vaccine. And now is a third phase of how do we get the vaccine widely distributed?
Well, I'm surprised that places like, much of Africa did not get an explosion. Yes, South Africa had, but I'm talking continent in general.
Yes.
That didn't have this big explosion. So I'm kind of wondering, have they played it safe? Have everything they've done gone well? Or has it been a case of, because we, the rest of the world hasn't been traveling to go there, we're not taking the virus there. We're not being a part of their problems. We're kind of stayed away. So they've been not untouched, but not as impacted as the UK, EU, Canada, US, and many other places.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's going to be interesting about COVID, and to me is interesting in every disaster, when you're trying to understand what's happening in real time, you miss a lot of data and you rely on those historians to look back after the fact and find some things that are going to be obvious. And, a big question when the state of Florida, again, when they sent kids back to school in August for the start of the school year, all the health officials said these will be super spreader events, but they haven't been. And nobody can figure out why. And to me, that's very confusing. You would think if a bunch of young people are clustered together and probably not paying attention to social distancing and taking their mask off in the hall and just being kids, right? I expected those numbers to spike, and they didn't.
Mhm.
And no one's been able to figure out why. Or to your point, why in certain parts of Africa have things been more calm than, we think of first world countries are called first world for a reason. But what does that really mean?
Yeah.
Economically, maybe, but maybe not as resilient.
Well, I spoke with someone a little while ago, and they were saying that, and I'm going to use Florida as the example, that maybe Florida didn't get hit the way it might have or was projected to, because Florida is a state that a lot of people go to visit and then leave. And the people that live there, and I don't know if this is true, you could tell me if it is, a lot of people that live there don't go to all the touristy places that all these people that come in, they stick to themselves. And that's actually kind of true, because I used to work at a restaurant, I don't know what it is, 2 hours north of Toronto, in a city called Aurelia, and where Gordon Lightfoot is from, if anybody knows Aurelia. And when the summer season starts in Aurelia, you've got the docks full of tourists, downtown is full of tourists, but everyone that lives there goes somewhere else.
Exactly.
We don't mingle with those people because they're just a pain in the butt type thing, right? All those tourists. Could Florida have been like that too?
I'll give you that for the theme parks. I don't go to any of the theme parks unless I have an out of state, out of country visitor and they want to see the mouse, and we go and see the mouse. But again, the schools are only or predominantly locals and residents, and you didn't see higher than average rates with students, with teachers, with administrators, and no one can figure out why. And I'm not advocating that Florida's response to COVID was the right one, because I disagree completely. I just find it fascinating that things didn't spike when all of our other data points said that they would. So I think it'll be very curious, just, people who tried to understand the 1918 pandemic in real time and all the data you have after the fact, or 9/11 or Hurricane Katrina, pick any event, trying to understand and sift through all the data in real time is very challenging. Even understanding the actual infection rates, death rates, transmissions. So I'll be really curious a few years from now when historians start digging in. I'd love to know the story of why didn't schools become super spreader events? To your point, when spring break events in Florida last year clearly did accelerate transmission, and theme parks closed for the first time ever for months. And but the schools didn't really, statistically just folded in with everything else.
Politics aside, whether anyone agrees with Florida leadership or not, I hope it stays that way. Just for the simple fact, people stay healthy, and no one unnecessarily needs to suffer.
Absolutely.
On that, I think we've come to the end of our first segment. Today we are talking with James Green. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Today we are talking with James Green. James, great chat in the first segment. In this one, you recently presented at DRJ Spring.
Yes.
Spring being an operative word. And I know that was a virtual conference, but summer is coming up and other events. You're starting to see people start planning events again. What are your thoughts on what might be happening in the coming months?
Yeah. So I think I want to caveat, there's a difference between what I think should happen, right? From a risk management, safety, and pandemic standpoint. I want to talk about what Alex and I think will happen. I'm not endorsing a methodology. I'm just saying, here's what's going to happen. In my opinion, again, starting in the United States, I think schools are going to end in May or June, depending on where in the country you are. And I think that the people are going to start traveling and moving around in ways that we haven't seen in 2 years. And Alex, you saw something on TV the other day that was very surprising, right?
Yep, the Texas home opener, Major League Baseball, for anyone who isn't familiar with that. 40,000 people.
40,000 people in the stadium, no masks. As most people are aware, Texas is.
But they said masks were mandatory. They said you had to wear a mask.
Well, when they panned to that crowd, I didn't see a lot of masks.
Yeah, neither did I.
So yeah, DRGA spring got me thinking. People started talking. Hey, are you going to be in person? When are we going to see you in person? When are you going to start traveling? And I really think kids being out of school here and in most countries is going to be the tipping point. I think people are just going to snap and they're going to say, come June, July, you're month 16 and you want us to stay home again. I don't think that's realistic to ask people to stay home for a year and a half. And I think with it being the second summer in a row, people who I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people who didn't take any PTO or vacation last year or ate all that time and didn't really want to take time during the winter because it was cold and the kids were in school or virtual school. I think schools are going to get out and you are going to see airline and car travel in the highest that it's been in a year and a half.
Well, what do you think? I know some of that frustration is going to happen because I had Easter with my nieces and I was talking with them because they're a part of my bubble. So they are 11 and 10, between the three of them. And they were getting frustrated because they knew this is the second Easter in a row. They couldn't have a big family gathering. They couldn't go to their grandmothers. They couldn't go to a lot of their friends and do all these things. They're getting frustrated. So if they're getting frustrated, that's going to carry on to the parents.
Absolutely. My youngest son turns 15 this week. So he has the misfortune of having a second COVID birthday, right? A lot of us maybe only had one. He had one last year. It was early on in the pandemic for a lot of parts of the world. We had a Zoom party. And Alex, I can tell you 15 teenage boys on a Zoom who are unfamiliar at the time with Zoom. It was, I think, horrifying is probably the right word. And now, we had planned to go do something but there's not any options. So for the second year in a row, this poor guy is having a very laid back, he said, I don't want another old man birthday.
Thanks a lot.
I was like, thanks, buddy. But to your point, the kids are getting restless, which means mom and dad are getting restless because you're going to hear that chirping. And I just really think people are going to get in the car, and go. And especially with the inability to travel internationally still, I think you're going to see, I think Memorial Day weekend in the United States, which is usually the last weekend in May, is typically the kickoff of summer season in the US. I think we're going to see cars on the roads like we haven't seen in a year and a half.
And it's funny you mentioned May because the week before it is our uh, Victoria Day long weekend,
Yeah.
which we affectionately call in Canada May 2-4, meaning it's long weekend, 2-4 of beer, right? So it's May 2-4 weekend. And I know that that weekend, a lot of people head up to their cottages and their resorts, places that go campgrounds, and they're just going to vacate the Greater Toronto area. And I'm just going to speak about this area and head all up north. I know they're going to.
Yeah.
There's just no way people are going to stay, like you said, stay at home again for another summer. You can't do it. It's not good for your physical or mental health, and people just aren't going to do it.
Yeah, I don't think it's reasonable to ask people to make a sacrifice that long, right? And if you look at historically, when was the last time Western people, right, North American people, Western Europe had to make a sacrifice longer than a month? Was it World War II? Maybe? Like, what was something that cut across 2 years?
I know if my granddad was alive, he would be saying, "Hey, I was in the trenches for 4 or 5 years, and we suffered this." My mother
Yeah.
still remembers a year or two of ration cards for food, and going through all of that, and she just shakes her head right now, going, "And yet we can't even make it through one year where you have all those luxuries we didn't have back then."
My point of that, though, is what's the percentage of people who remember truly suffering during that time? It's a very small percentage, right? Both of my parents were born post World War II, right? So they vividly remember, like the oil embargo and the gas prices and stuff. But how much did, that changed a lot of lives and cars, but in terms of your point, suffering, being in the trench, getting ration cards. I remember speaking to my great aunt about the Great Depression, right? But now it's a memory of a memory. And so what percentage of the world population now has had to suffer in that way? And I don't think we're built now, like you said, to stay at home for 18 months.
No, and we've got all these luxuries now that we have the luxury of being able to go to all these different places. So if we want to get out of our houses after over a year, easily over a year, we're going to go, because a lot of people I talk to my neighbors too, socially distance, of course, as I'm walking the dog, but they're all saying, "Oh my God, when is this going to be over?" You can just see people getting tense now, starting to talk about it. Where before it was, "I'm being careful, don't come too close." Now you can actually see their shoulders tighten up, and they're itching. And then you end up with a situation in Texas where you've got 40,000 people. Now they may go away and spread, for anyone who did have it, has COVID, go off and spread it into other communities that didn't have it before.
Yeah, I think two things jumped out to me right away. Going back and speaking to World War II, do we have the confidence in leadership that we did then? So, the world looked to Churchill, the world looked to FDR, and for the most part felt like these people are leading us in the right direction. And if you look at who leadership has been throughout the world the last year regarding this issue, there's not a lot of leaders where people say, "Yeah, my president, my prime minister, my chancellor, this is the man or woman for the job who's really, leading us thoughtfully through this." And then I like what you said about Texas, because the other problem is we're all looking around and there's jealousy, right? So I have family in California. They went to true lockdown. Right. And I'm in Florida, and, we're Florida man, and we don't care as a state about anything. And people look to us, well, how come they get to do whatever? And I get my vaccine before my family in California. Or to your point, how come I live somewhere and I stay at home and there's 40,000 people watching baseball. And if they're going to do it, why can't I? There's a real inconsistency in that suffering. So not only have we not experienced suffering, I think, in a very long time, the suffering has been different. And look where you live and where I live, just over the winter, here it was 60 degrees Fahrenheit. I could go outside every single day. Where I have a lot of family in Michigan, it was 15 degrees. It was dark and snowy. They couldn't go outside. They couldn't get fresh air. So you're asking them, their shelter in place, I think, was much more mentally and emotionally and physically challenging than mine has been.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned leadership. I was thinking that it seems today it doesn't matter, regardless of party, regardless of country. It seems people are more willing to try and get a soundbite on the news so that they get their name out there and get that little click that says, "Oh yeah, we like your tweet, we like your Facebook post," to get the headline rather than really stand up and take the leadership. And you mentioned two great examples, FDR and Churchill. There was no, well, I'm sure there was, but you don't read a lot about of all the criticisms that those leaders had. They are leading us through a war and people rallied around them. But that's not happening here. Right now, it's everybody pointing the finger at everyone else. You're not making a decision. You made the wrong decision. You made the right decision, but you didn't talk to me about it. So that means you made the wrong decision. Everyone's trying to outdo each other rather than focusing on what needs to get done.
Yeah, certainly. I think your point about the sound bite, right? One of the things I've noticed, with the advent of the 24-hour news cycle, there's not 24 hours worth of news.
Mm-hmm.
Right. When I was a kid, there was 6 o'clock. There was an hour and a half of news. Maybe there was 2 local, and then Ted Koppel or Peter Jennings in the U.S. at 11:30, and that was it. And you had people who could focus on leading, maybe even in the wrong direction, but at least going in a direction. And now, in the era of the soundbite, you have, well, what did somebody say this morning that I can either support or get offended by? And you just, politicians in any time are not good emergency managers. No. I think history has shown any politician anywhere in the world, that's not their life calling, yet they make the ultimate decisions during emergencies, during disasters. And I think with this one, there's been a real lack of leadership. And I think when there's a lack of leadership, then people say, well, I don't believe it's only going to be 2 more weeks or 3 more weeks or 4 more months, or is this forever? So, kids are out of school and we're going to hit the road and we're going to go live our lives.
Yeah. Or worse, they just hold up their hand and say, I'm done with you. I'm not paying any attention anymore. I'm just going to go do what I want. And, off come the masks, and social distancing disappears, and people just start doing what they want to do and just said, I'm throwing caution to the wind. I've had enough of all the blame. I've had enough of all the arguments. I've had enough of the sound bites, enough of the misinformation. I'm just walking away from the whole thing. And then that causes an even bigger problem, because now you've got all these disillusioned people who may have been doing the right thing, now don't care because they've had enough.
Yeah. They just get fed up.
Yeah. So you mentioned DRJ Spring. What do you think might happen over the summer and in the fall because in the fall, that's a big convention season as well. And I'm not naming any conventions or conferences that are happening because I don't want to put anybody on the spot or feel as though I'm speaking for them. But in that that time frame, there's a lot of these going on. Do you think there's a chance we might, in some places, have in person or some hybrid, or do you think we'll stay virtual until literally everything else is fine?
I think some organizations are really striving for some in-person events, right, in a scaled down capacity. And you've seen there is, a conference in Toronto that's been moved to December specifically because of that, right? So I think organizations, trade organizations, companies like mine, vendors, they want to be out there once it's safe. And I think you get a vaccination level up to 55, 60% of the population, you're going to start to see people traveling. I think what the X factor is going to be is most companies have not had to spend any money on T&E, travel and entertainment for a year and a half. And so even though revenues have been down, that expense has come right back into their pocket. So a second question for me will be, will companies willingly spend to send people to expensive conferences at expensive hotels in expensive cities again? Or will they have said, well, you know what, you figured out your job the last year and a half. We figured out how to sell the last year and a half. So I think conferences come back, but I think they're going to be very different. I think vendors and sponsors have figured out how to sell, right? Mm-hmm. People maybe have learned how to network, maybe not as effectively, but then companies are going to be like, well, we'll put that back in the budget in 2022. So I think
that's still new. All that networking, the new way of networking is new when conferences and, all those kind of things have been going on for decades.
Exactly.
So, they still may be navigating this new way of doing things, but if it's cost effective, they might want to continue doing it that way.
Yeah, I think at the very least, any conferences we see this year will be much smaller than in years past. And like I said, I think companies will say, well, we didn't have that we took that out of the budget for the whole year. So maybe next year. And I think, there's some conferences and things that have fundamentally changed. You and I, both virtually attended BCI World in the winter, November. I can't remember.
Yeah, 2020. Yeah.
That's historically a very expensive conference to get to if you're not in Europe, because it's in London. And if you're in North America, South America, Asia, Africa, and you say to your boss, hey, I'd like to go to this conference. By the way, it's in London for 5 days. And so I need $8,000-9,000 US to go. The answer was no.
Yeah.
But in November, it was $150 virtually.
Yeah. It's really cheap. Yeah.
So I think some of those conferences are going to stick with that hybrid approach. And maybe that causes a truly more global reach, which I would be very excited about, to get to virtually meet and network with people from all over the world that historically I wouldn't.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting way of going forward with some of these events. I had a thought just jump in before we take our next break. With the location of some of these conferences and conventions, literally across Canada and the US, and I'll use those as the examples. Do you think, depending on how the COVID vaccinations are going, will help determine? I'll use Toronto because they're down the road for me. Toronto, things aren't going well, so the conference that you're alluding to that moved to December will turn around and say, you know what, we're now totally virtual because things aren't going well in Toronto. Or you're in Florida, so in Tampa, things aren't going well here, so the conference we're having here, we're no longer doing the in-person thing. It's going to be virtual. Do you think that might play a role in some of the decisions?
Yeah, I think it'll certainly play a role with conference organizers. Some of those more international conferences, if people can't even come into your country, are going to have to be virtual. And then as an attendee, I would certainly look at what is happening on the ground. I don't ever want to go to any type of hotspot, whether it's civil unrest, pandemic. It doesn't matter what it is. Back in the days when you and I used to travel, the State Department advisories drove a lot of my decisions internationally. And now it would be what's the infection rate? What's the vaccination rate? What are all those metrics that we've all been obsessed over the last 12 months? I would certainly incorporate them into my decision making to travel. And I would expect a lot of people in our profession or otherwise would as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great note to have our second break. We're talking with James Green. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking with James Green today. James, our last point that we were going to talk about is supply chain. And the biggest thing that a lot of people should have seen in the news recently is that massive Empire State Building ship stuck in the Suez Canal.
Exactly. So I want to get your opinion on two things, Alex. First, to your point, we're business continuity and resilience people first and foremost. So let's talk about maybe the busiest shipping channel in the history of the world. And it seems that their business continuity plan, if a ship got stuck, was a tiny backhoe, which was the same one when I needed to dig a hole in my yard a couple of years ago. So that tells me that, again, they clearly never considered that anything would ever happen.
No, you mentioned the backhoe for your yard. And I said during a break, there's one just down the street doing a driveway right now. And that was being used to dig out this massive, massive cargo ship.
Yeah. So not only had they never considered business continuity, but look at the decisions that were made once that ship got stuck, right? They didn't start pulling containers off that ship until how many days in to lighten the load? Like, I would think that would be the first thing you would do while you're trying to unstick it with your little, Tonka truck backhoe was, hey, maybe the lighter the ship is, the faster we can turn it. And that seemed to be not a consideration for, it looks like 96 hours before you have a ship with 20,000 containers that we start to lighten the load.
Well, I also found it interesting that from the pictures I saw, the Suez Canal really just looks like an extra large backhoe just went through the desert.
Yes.
And that was it. There were no pictures that I saw, so I could be wrong in some areas, but there were no, I don't even know what you call them, but walls along the side of the canal in case something happens and the ship did go off to the side. It would hit something and, not get stuck. It would just be off to the side. In this case, it looks like it was just a sandbank, so wind, anything that happens, it looked like they were floating in a pond, where a boat could go anywhere.
Yeah, and I could be totally wrong. I've read one book about the Panama Canal that alluded to the Suez Canal, so I'm getting way out of my expertise. But it's my understanding, I believe it was just dredged from one edge to the other. So yeah, there's really no mechanism there if there's a bump in the night. But I wanted to ask you, we're risk managers. When are people going to start to consider supply chain as critical risk management? Because I got to thinking about it. COVID started initially before the world shut down. It was a huge supply chain problem for companies that had interest in China and Northern Italy. The Suez Canal, I'm looking over here, Bloomberg said $9.6 billion in US a day in shipments goes through the Suez Canal. That went to zero. You've heard numbers, 10% of the world's supply chain, 12% of the world's supply chain, some fantastic number. So we've now had, in 12 months, 2 global supply chain incidents. And I'm wondering, what's it going to take for risk managers, for BC managers to pop supply chain into, the front of mind? What are your thoughts? Are you thinking people are still seeing these as one-offs or as a pattern?
I think a lot see them as one-offs. And because some people haven't actually done proper supply chain management investigation in their organization, they believe, well, nothing I use is on that ship, so it doesn't bother me. But what they forget is one of your vendors or suppliers or something is using something on that ship. So you are going to be impacted indirectly. Because it's not impacting you directly, leadership and everything kind of shrugs it off. Maybe that's a little harsh to say shrugs it off, but doesn't take it as seriously or doesn't investigate the full supply chain. They just look at a link or two, and that's it. Okay, well, if you're not available, we'll just go over there. And there we're done. And which is the very simple, grade one way of thinking. If I can't get the sand over here, I'll just play in the sand over there. And I think a lot of people don't really realize that we're in a world now where we're so interconnected, whether you know it or not, whether you're aware of it or not, that something can happen somewhere on the other side of the world and you will be impacted. A tsunami hit Japan, what was it, 5-6 years ago now? And the plant down the road from me, the Toyota plant, had to shut down for a while. Nobody saw that coming. And it was triggered, It started by a tsunami. Exactly. And it all happened in sequence to the point where nothing was showing up and they couldn't build cars. And they didn't think of that. So I think a lot of people see a lot of this as one-offs, and because they're not directly impacted, they're not investigating the full picture. They're just looking at a piece of the puzzle. Oh, that's my piece, and I'm fine. But they don't realize all the other pieces that go around it.
Yeah, and I think it's going to happen more often. Manufacturing companies around the globe in the 80s and 90s went to a just-in-time philosophy, right? Mm-hmm. Because they saw what the Japanese automakers were doing. You had two things. You had the quality, right? Their philosophy of Kaizen, never ending improvement. And you had just in time, which reduced the amount of carrying cost and cost on your books. So you saw a lot of manufacturers go from 45, 60 days of inventory to 3. But you keep having these bumps in the night, these disruptions that are 4 or 5 days, it's going to burn you, and it's going to continue to burn you. And I just wonder, we see a lot of executives who can explain something away one time, no matter what it is. And I'm wondering if now the Suez Canal on top of COVID is going to get more executives to say, hey, we've taken quarterly hits because of supply chain now twice in the last 5 quarters, and the shareholders or the board or investors, people are going to start pushing back when money is lost.
Yeah, I think right now, 2 things. With COVID overlapping everything, while COVID as a disaster has been going on, there has been Suez Canal. There has been Australian fires and California fires, wildfires, snowstorms, ice storms, the power outages in Texas. There's been multiple storms that can impact all the different suppliers and vendors and partners and everyone around you. You sold a product to a customer, but the customer says, no, you can't ship it to me right now. And you're going, well, I have to ship it to you. I don't have room to keep it. Well, I can't take it because my facility is shut down. I think people have to really take off the rose-tinted glasses and really understand that supply chain isn't just one-on-one relationship. It's multiple relationships. And excuse me. And 2, which I just forgot, I just had it in my head and it just slipped out. I'll jump in when I remember it.
Yeah, I was reading an interesting article in Bloomberg today. They said one of the fastest growing areas of commercial real estate is land being converted to warehouses, because as all these issues are happening, the port in LA is backed up for how many weeks of shipments. People don't know where to put stuff. And to your point, if a customer wants something or doesn't want something, where am I going to put it now? So you're seeing a lot of these PE firms and hedge funds investing in land and converting it into basically, super warehouses, because we can't figure out how to move stuff around as effectively as we used to.
And I remembered my point, the second point. I was talking with Mike Campbell of Fusion Risk Management, CEO, and I asked him the question. I said, do you think this challenge that professionals have with buy-in, should exist anymore? And he said, no, it should not. Not after all of what's been going on. There's no way anyone should be having difficulty understanding business continuity or supply chain, risk management, anything, and I think if they are still having that challenge with buy-in for all this stuff, maybe they shouldn't be where they are, because the world has totally changed around them and they're not changing with it.
I agree. If a company doesn't understand the relevance of business continuity or risk management now, to your point, they never will. And if you're a colleague of ours who works at one of those companies, we'll help get you out. We'll help find you somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because if you can't grasp the importance of what we do now, that's a lost cause.
Yeah. There's nothing that could happen that would ever change their mind.
Exactly.
Because you're experiencing multiple situations right now around the globe, and like the Suez and wildfires and floods, and there's even the potential for, is it Florida?
Of course, it's Florida. A massive tsunami of wastewater. Yes.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. Yes.
Where else would it be? Where else would it be? Yeah.
You have that potential happening, and that could be, and hopefully not, but that could be another potential incident where, people just got to be prepared. You got to watch out for these things,
Exactly.
And anything can happen. Literally anything can happen. You can't pigeonhole disasters anymore.
That's correct.
Look at different scenarios. If this happens, then this will occur. No, this might happen. As bizarre as it may sound, there is now the percentage that it will happen at some point. Just a matter of when. So any final thoughts, James, you want to share before we end for today?
No, I'd love to get feedback from the audience, what they thought about the format, our topics. It was really exciting to sit down with you, yesterday and today and say, hey, what do we want to talk about that's going on right now? Not a call for papers that we have to submit 6 months ahead of time and record it 4 months ahead of time and it's dated or stale. I was really excited just to let's talk about this week in business continuity and what's going on in the world.
Yeah, maybe that's what we'll call it. This Week in Business Continuity with James Green.
I love it. That's right. We've got a title.
Yeah, we got a title there. There you go for our monthly chat. James, always great chatting with you. Oh, and just for the record, I don't make James do an agenda 6 months in advance. He was talking about conferences and conventions. Just thought I better clear that. Alex makes him does this. All his guests do this. No, I don't. So James, thanks again. I'm looking forward to talking to you next month already. I'm sure, well, the way things are going, I'm sure there's going to be some things to touch on, somewhere in the world.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks again, James. And to everybody watching and listening, stay prepared, everyone. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.